During the late Jurassic, much of Europe is a series of islands that vary in size surrounded by a vast shallow sea. Despite the smaller land masses, large dinosaurs can still be found here, including one of the most elusive predators of this time, Metriacanthosaurus. At 7 meters long and 1 ton in weight, these predators are at home both in thick forests and on open fields. However, one of the best places to find them is on the coasts. An adult female is up at the crack of dawn, strolling along the sands and rocks looking for a potential meal. It may seem odd that a creature of her size would spend her time scavenging as opposed to actively hunting, but almost all carnivores scavenge, as easy meals can be few and far between. The female Metriacanthosaurus is walking along this stretch of beach as it has proven to be a productive source of carrion, at least that which comes from the sea. Everything from fish, marine reptiles, and even drowned pterosaurs wash up on shore. Of course, most animals that die in the ocean either sink to the bottom or are consumed by other marine life. But the seas around here are so bountiful that enough food makes it to land that beachcombing is a viable tactic for many species, even a large theropod such as herself. The female breathes in the morning air, already catching the scent of multiple potential meals. One scent in particular sticks out more, and she is moving towards it steadily. However, she may be walking for hours. Off the beach on the rocks that dot the landscape is a colony of Rhamphorhynchus. The small pterosaurs are also getting ready for a day of hunting, and their constant squawking and crying is so loud it almost blocks out the sounds of the waves crashing on the beach. Fortunately, the female Metriacanthosaurus doesn't need to use her hearing at the moment. Sight and smell are good enough. So much so, she sees a small fish has washed up on the shore. With careful precision, she lowers her head down and picks up the morsel in her jaws, before lifting her head back and swallowing it down. Barely a snack, but one can never be too picky. She continues her long walk along the beach, the calls of the Rhamphorhynchus steadily beginning to die down. As she strides along the sand, she doesn't find any more carrion, but she follows the scent as it promises a decent meal, if she just keeps walking. Further inland, the calls of sauropods echo down onto the shore, and the female considers following those noises instead. But she had no idea if any of the herd members would be small enough for her to hunt. She had a fix on whatever was making that smell, and she would follow it. At one point, there is a shallow stretch of water in her path. If she continued following the sand, it would likely add considerable time to her trek, so she wades into the water. Fortunately, it only comes up to just above her knees, and the current is calm, so the waves barely splash her underside. Walking through the water is more taxing for such a large animal, but she has done this multiple times, and has even swam between islands when looking for food. As she moves towards the dry land, something in the corner of her eye catches her attention. Looking to her left, she sees something different about a small patch of water further out from her. There is a slight rise that is not like the rest of the waves. Something is swimming just below the surface, creating its own visible wake, and it is heading straight for her. The female has seen only a mere fraction of the dangers that lurk beneath the waves, and they were more than enough to make her fear the deep sea. Something was swimming towards her, so her pace quickened. She was built for running at high speed, but the water around her legs and the sand that swallowed her feet every time she took a step was making it look like she was moving in slow motion. She kept one eye on the approaching wave that gave away the position of whatever was coming in for her. For now, its pace remained the same. Perhaps it was examining her before committing to an attack. The Metriacanthosaurus pulled her legs up in great strides, now splashing water out in front of her, desperate to get to land, or water shallow enough that the threat couldn't follow her. The unseen creature was getting closer and closer, so much so, she could see a vague silhouette under the water. Breathing heavily through her mouth, the theropod trips, and her upper body splashes into the water, but she quickly regains her footing, pulling herself back up. The creature moves behind her, out of her sight, but now building up speed. The water is getting shallower, but she doesn't stop her slow march, as instinct tells her the threat is right behind her. Finally, she reaches water that is shallow enough to barely inhibit her steps, and she breaks into a sprint. The splashing of her footfalls spreads out along the beach, dying down as she exits the water and runs up the sand. She doesn't stop till there is at least 2 body lengths between herself and the water. Stopping, she catches her breath and shakes herself, sending the salty water flying in all directions. She turns and looks back to where her pursuer should have been, but there was no sign of any other creatures on the entire beach, almost as if nothing was chasing her in the first place. Still slightly shaken, the carnivore resumes tracking down her next meal, following the smell that was now stronger than ever. About half an hour of walking later, the Metriacanthosaurus finds what she is looking for. Brought in by the high tide and caught on some rocks is what remains of a dead ichthyosaur. The 4-meter marine reptile was missing its tail and a large section of its body behind the dorsal fin, having clearly been scavenged both before and after washing up here, and yet it still had plenty of flesh left over. The female's long trek and risky swim had paid off. She sunk her teeth into the ichthyosaur's decaying flesh and ripped a chunk clean off, swallowing it eagerly. But then she grabbed the carcass and pulled it further up onto the sand, away from the dangerous waters. She didn't want something coming up from the depths to steal her find. The ocean sometimes gave away its spoils, but it could just as easily take them away. Hello fellow travellers and welcome back. Today we will be breaking down another large carnivore known from very little material, Metriacanthosaurus. The holotype of Metriacanthosaurus was discovered in 1871 near the English town of Weymouth, and included an incomplete hip, leg bone, and vertebra. Additional vertebra and some other pieces of the skeleton have been found in the same area. It wouldn't be named until 1923, but it was thought to be a species of Megalosaurus. It wasn't until 1964 that scientist Alec Walker re-examined the remains and concluded it was its own unique genus, naming it Metriacanthosaurus walker. The genus name meaning moderately spined lizard. This is due to scientists believing at the time that Metriacanthosaurus' spine was taller than an average theropod's. However, now we know that Metriacanthosaurus' spine was, well, basically normal size for a theropod. Metriacanthosaurus belonged to the Metriacanthosauridae family, and lived in the late Jurassic 160 million years ago. Based on the limited remains using the 80 centimeter femur as a guide, it is estimated to have grown up to 8 meters long, stood 1.8 meters tall at the hip, and weighed around a ton. Metriacanthosauridae is an offshoot of Allosauridae, and includes other species like Yangchuanosaurus, Synraptor, and Siamotyrannus. Metriacanthosaurus itself lived during a time when much of Europe was covered in a vast shallow sea. Because of this, much of the fossils found in the formations Metriacanthosaurus was discovered in, those being the Oxford clay and Kimmeridge clay, are marine deposits. These locations have provided incredible fossils of marine ecosystems, however are a little lacking on dinosaur remains. With that being said, we do know that Metriacanthosaurus lived alongside ornithopods, sauropods, stegosaurs, and other theropods, so clearly the dinosaurs were doing well despite not being connected to the main continent. From what we know, Metriacanthosaurus would have been a contender for top predator in its environment, but was likely more of a lean, fast predator, as opposed to a burly brawler. Unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of its skeleton, and crucially, we are missing the skull, which would give us a great insight into what it may have been eating, and therefore how it lived. So with that being said, let's look at its odd inclusion in the Jurassic Park franchise. Metriacanthosaurus made a cameo in the first movie as one of the embryos that Nedry stole from the cryochamber, but it never gets seen on screen in the entire franchise. Apparently they did clone some and put them on display for Jurassic World, but between then and the events of Fallen Kingdom, Metriacanthosaurus becomes extinct for a second time, not being able to compete with the other predators on the island. But fret not, if you want to create one for yourself, you can do so in the Jurassic World Evolution games. Yes, it took over 2 decades, but we finally got to see what this animal may have looked like in the series. Is it speculative? Well, yes, but is it a good design? I think so. Despite its obscurity in both real life and the Jurassic franchise, Metriacanthosaurus does have a bit of a dedicated fanbase. It's one of those barely known species that some people gravitate to, and I can't blame them. But what do you think of Metriacanthosaurus? And for my question of the week, do you like the idea of large theropods being beachcombers, or do you think they would stick more to active hunting? What lesser known dinosaur would you like me to do a breakdown on next? And until then, please like, share, subscribe, and thank you for watching.